Hey, friends, and welcome to another episode of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. It is a pleasure, as always, to have you here in the listening world, or perhaps you're watching on YouTube. However, you got here, did you subscribe? Go do that. It's a great Mother's Day present. Subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on Apple, hit us on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube, so that way you never miss an episode of Syracuse Sports. Not that you would ever miss an episode of the show, because I know you just sit around waiting for the next episode of Syracuse Sports. I need it. I need it. I need it. When is it coming? When is it coming? And you're just updating your phone all the time. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I know that's what you're doing. But when you subscribe, it lets you know, like, hey, new episode, Syracuse Sports up. So make sure you do that. Make sure you are also a Syracuse Sports Insider. Join the cool text club, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I love about Syracuse Sports Insiders, amongst many things, by the way, because we are just having an absolute blast with this. I got a confession to make. I feel like this is a Foo Fighters song. I got another confession to make. I hate group texts. Hate them. Every time I get involved in a group text, I get out. I don't like them. Just never been my thing. But the Syracuse Sports Insiders, see, it's not a group text. What you're doing is you get to text me, and I text you back, right? And you get to see what your other Syracuse Sports Insiders are saying, what they're seeing, the questions they're asking. But that's the beauty of it. It's not a group text. It's not 14 people in the text at once, because that drives me nuts. But you guys sending me your texts, your questions, your opinions, your thoughts, what you want to hear on this podcast, we are having an absolute blast with it. And we would love for you to join the Syracuse Sports Insider community. You can try it free for 2 weeks, and here's how you do that. Just text the word orange to 315-847-3895, and you will get text from me. You will get any breaking news that I have first. You will get my opinions first. You will have the ability to ask me any question you want, and hopefully I have the answer for you. The Axe, Brent, Anything podcast that we do, this podcast in general, things that you want to see and you want to hear, that's the beauty of the interaction in being a Syracuse Sports Insider. It's just $3.99 a month. After that, you kidding me? Less than $1 a week for all that hijinks and tomfoolery you get as a Syracuse Sports Insider. You can't beat that. Okay, couple of things that I want to go over here before we get to our guest, Anish Shroff. Anish has been a friend of mine for a long time. He did radio with me back in the day, Syracuse alum. He was on the ESPN show Dream Job, if you recall that, and Stephen A. Smith to this day screwed him on that show. And I will never forgive you for that, Stephen A. But Anish is doing fine now, play-by-play broadcaster, which we'll focus mostly on today for college lacrosse on ESPN, Syracuse lacrosse, and where they're at, their seed, their bracket, and what Anish sees in this NCAA tournament with a focus on Syracuse and the ACC. Anish is also the play-by-play voice for the Carolina Panthers. We're going to tell some fun stories, including this one. I've got to tell you this story. You guys love Uncle Brent stories, okay? Here's an Uncle Brent story, and I swear to God, this is 100% true. Anish will back me up on this. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the end of The Sopranos, right? Really, it's been like 20 years. If you haven't seen the show, I'm going to spoil the end of it for you here. Okay, so at the end of The Sopranos, right? Fade to black. Anish came over my house to watch the last episode of The Sopranos back in the day because he didn't have HBO. So he came over, we had some Chianti, we had some cannolis, right? We made it a kind of an Italian feast. It was great. We had a lot of fun. And then we watched the show. I swear to God, this is true. So at the end of The Sopranos, the screen goes black. When that happened, I am not making this up. My neighborhood went black. The power went out in my neighborhood, like boom, just like that, as if somebody just shut the grid off. When that show ended, at the same freaking time. So there was a good 10, 15 minutes where we were freaking out. What just happened? So I'm thinking we missed the end of the show because the power went out. I'm calling friends. I'm calling my sister. I'm calling people like, what happened at the end of The Sopranos? Well, the screen went black. Yeah, I know, but wait a minute. Your screen went black too, right? And this was, texting and everything wasn't really around then. It was just starting to come in, right? I'm freaking out. I think Anish thinks not only like, we missed the end of the show, and why is my neighborhood black? I will never forget that. You could not time that if you tried. Screen goes black, power goes out in my neighborhood. Exact same time. Exact same time. So a lot of tension in those 20 minutes trying to figure out, like did the Russians just launch a nuclear strike at the end of The Sopranos, and I'm never gonna see the end of The Sopranos? What? Craziness. Another story I wanted to tell you, Jersey related, by the way. So you will see over my shoulder, if you are watching on YouTube, that I have put Mr. Springsteen here over our usual picture of Springsteen. And I don't know if you can see the inscription here. So this is the Post-Standard newspaper. Yep, we still print that thing. So I told the story in our last Axe Brent episode about how my mother turned down a date with Bruce Springsteen. True story. So Springsteen, of course, came to Syracuse recently. We reran some of the photos that a Syracuse photographer took, by the way, the famous photo when he's leaning on Clarence Clemens, which was the cover, of course, of Born to Run, and some other photos, which you'll see here. So my mother wrote me a note and gave me a copy of this. And I don't know if you can read it on the screen, but what that says is this is what he looked like when I met him. So my mother, who turned down a date with Bruce Springsteen, true story, in her words, because he was too scruffy looking. That's how scruffy looking he was. That's just wasn't good enough for my mom. Sorry, Bruce. That's the deal. So that's why that is taking a place on the shelf. That's how scruffy looking Mr. Springsteen was. A Jersey resident himself who knows all about Springsteen and the Jersey connections at Syracuse football and all things Jersey. My main man, Anish Shroff, joins us now here on Syracuse Sports. Let's take a listen. So of all the exciting things that we can talk about right now with the great Anish Shroff who joins us here, we've got NCAA Tournament lacrosse. We got my man on the beat here as the play-by-play voice of the Carolina Panthers. We got Syracuse football just blowing up. His daughter growing up before our very eyes, speaking multiple languages. But all of that topped by this, Anish. Very soon, you, in your own backyard, can go to Wegmans. How excited are you?
So when I go to Raleigh, there is a Wegmans in Raleigh. And I pretty much go there every time. Because I've tried to explain this to my wife, who's from Seattle and doesn't understand this whole infatuation with Wegmans. All the transplants in Charlotte, when the news broke that Wegmans is coming to Charlotte, all the transplants who had any idea of what Wegmans was, like myself, we were euphoric. And she goes, "It's just a supermarket."
No, it's not. No.
It's a different
How
thing.
dare you? How dare you?
Go, if you've been down the bakery aisle or the buffet aisle, or you just are in Wegmans, it feels like if heaven decided to have a grocery store.
That's exactly
it would
right.
be called Wegmans. It is I said, here's the best part of Wegmans for you. I will now volunteer as tribute to do all the grocery shopping.
That's exactly it. See, you want to do it. That's my thing. That's my Sunday morning routine. My wife hates going to the grocery store. I'm happy to go to the store.
If there's a Wegmans, I volunteer as tribute.
There you go, my man. I will go in the refrigerator and dump out things. Just be like, oh, gotta go to Wegmans. See you later. Who's happier
what we
than
should
you?
do?
Fantastic.
If the ACC tournament keeps coming back to Charlotte, or if Syracuse is going to play some more neutral site games in Charlotte, somebody should chronicle their record in the Queen City, pre-Wegmans and post-Wegmans.
Now we're talking.
That's
now
just
we're going to do
analytics.
that. We're going to do that because you thought of it. And we'll chronicle it here on this very podcast. So what's got to happen now? I'm getting way off track here. But what's got to happen now, Anish? Nothing against the fine sponsors of the Atlantic Coast Conference, but Wegmans, you got to move in on Food Lion's territory, okay? Yeah. I always just shrug when I see these Food Lion commercials. Like, come on, get in there. Get in there. Give them some legit competition on that ACC broadcast.
Yeah, I think to me now, you're in Raleigh, you're in Charlotte, you're making your way down south. You're starting to annex some of the southern tier of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Now you got to plant your flag. Now
That's
you got to
right.
fly your flag.
That's right.
And I'm with you. And I think, again, it's a way to endear yourself, too, to the folks who are now part of this conference from Syracuse, from BC. And if you're thinking, again, wider reach, hey, that's exposure now to California with Cal and Stanford.
Exactly.
Exposure now to Texas and the Dallas and the Metroplex with SMU. So
see,
if you're listening, Wegmans, there's a lot of positives here.
We're only trying to help you. We're only trying to help you.
What are we doing talking about sports? We should be in marketing for Wegmans.
Exactly. That's a whole other podcast that we'll get into another time.
We're doing the wrong thing.
Great to see you, my friend. You got the sweatshirt on right there. It's lacrosse season. We just had Selection Sunday. The bracket is out. Let's start with Syracuse here, Anish. They're a 4 seed. Mm-hmm. They probably should have been a 3 seed, considering they beat Johns Hopkins and their record's better than Hopkins, but we know how strict the committee kind of rigidly goes with RPI. So seeding aside here, Hopkins is a 3, Syracuse is a 4, whatever. They got a home game. They got Towson here first. You just called Syracuse and Duke in the ACC tournament. You've seen Syracuse a few times this year. So let's just kind of zoom out here and how you think the Syracuse team can be successful in the postseason.
Well, Will Mark had an off game on Friday. I think we all saw that. And if we've seen enough of Will Mark, which we have, that was an outlier. I do expect him to be better. One quick thought on the seeding. Originally, I did have Syracuse. When I mocked my bracket up, I had them as a 3. I had Hopkins as a 4 based on head-to-head. I think what the committee may have done, and this may help Syracuse, is if you're the 3, you're getting Virginia in the quarterfinal. Now as a 4, you get either Denver or Michigan. They maybe wanted to avoid an ACC quarterfinal. So I think from a league standpoint, when you look at the pairings, there is not a single potential ACC quarterfinal matchup. So if you're Jim Phillips, you're going, oh, I can get 4 teams to championship weekend, and I can have an ACC tournament part 2 in Philadelphia. So I think from a league standpoint, it actually helps that Syracuse doesn't get paired with another ACC school. But when I watched them on Friday, I wondered, did the layoff hurt them? They had played 2 games in 30 days leading up to that ACC semifinal. They had the week off prior. Was it too much time off? And if you watched that game unfold, Duke blitzed them early. It was 5-0. It was 9-2 after the first quarter. After that, more or less a fairly even game, but that was the difference. And the game was over early on. I was impressed that Duke was able to, beat Syracuse on the faceoffs without Jake Naso. I was a little surprised that John Mullen was taking a lot of the early faceoffs, and then Mason Cohn, we saw him come in later. To me, Syracuse just didn't have the ball enough. They didn't have to possess the ball. They've got to possess the ball. You get that offense more looks. I've had multiple defensive coordinators in college lacrosse tell me it's the hardest offense to prepare for, because it's not one guy you can focus on. And they say nobody plays better as a group of 6, and they have scoring depth. A lot of teams, there's a significant drop-off when you go from that first midfield to the second midfield. Syracuse has one of the most productive second midfields in the country, so they're able to get scoring. They're able to get scoring off their face-off unit, which I think is one of the best, with either Mullen or Cohn, and then you got Stevens and Alexo on the wings. And what Duke did in that game, when they moved McAdory down to attack, it forced Syracuse to counter. Now you had to bump Alexo down. So now you lose a critical transition piece that's a big part of your offense. So there were a lot of moving parts in that game. But again, this team over the course of, whatever it is, 15, 16 games has shown me enough. They've shown me enough resiliency. Now you have a game under your belt. You just played Duke. I would expect them to be ready for Towson this weekend.
Yeah, there's been a running dialogue with Syracuse fans this year, Anish, about is Syracuse lacrosse back, and what's the mark that makes you say, yep, they're back. And if you want to go by the lofty standards of the history, it's when they play on Memorial Day again. I'm not even saying they got to win on Memorial Day again. When you get back to Memorial Day, now grab the rubber stamp and say they're back, okay? So we'll see if they have the goods to do it, as you just laid out there with what kind of roster they have, right? I'll say this, though. There's some familiar feelings here. Syracuse in that Sunday night window after graduation, back in the tournament. This is going to be Gary Gates' first tournament as a head coach. There's a lot of things they're kind of going through here for the first time, even though there are some familiar things. John O'Derna at defensive coordinator, and there's still some things that have to be experienced for the first time. But there is true signs of progress here because Syracuse hasn't even been in the tournament the past couple of years. They haven't been in this Sunday night slot. They haven't had a home game, right? They haven't won a tournament game since 2017. They haven't hosted at home since 2018. They haven't been in the tournament for a few years. So at the very least, the path to Memorial Day has been laid out. Now they just got to walk it.
They do, and the first round opponent is far from a cakewalk. Towson comes in rolling. Boy, if you look at what they did in their conference tournament, a couple of blowout wins. I think they beat Delaware by 9-10 goals in the championship. They beat Drexel by 9 or 10 in the semifinals. They've been rolling. They're really, really strong defensively. They got a young man by the name of Colby Bars who will probably get Joey Spallina. He's from my neck of the woods. I know his dad a little bit. We see each other at the gym. Great family. But he's a big physical defender, and he can match feet. And Towson's it's not a layup. The last time Syracuse, got to the quarterfinals, it was Towson, different team, obviously.
They knocked them out.
2017. Yep. So there's some history here. They played in a national championship game as well back in the 1990, I think it was. But anyway, to me, I look at the Syracuse team and I say, I don't know if they have that one generational transcendent star, but when they play together as a collective, it's there. There are moments where they do leave you scratching your head a little bit. The Cornell game, right? That's one that they should have won. And if they won that game, they might end up being a 2 seed right now. The Maryland game, that was there for them. The Army game, that was there for them. And big moments, it's the same as basketball. You get into the NCAA tournament, especially in round 1. The closer that first round game stays late, the closer it gets, and you get into the third quarter and you get into the fourth quarter, the pendulum swings and the pressure is now on the seeded team. And you have English, you have Stevens, you have some transfers who've won. But the core of this team, they haven't won. And to me, that's going to be a big mystery. How will they react to pressure? Do they play free and, hey, we're back in the tournament, let's go do something? Or do you start feeling the weight of your school's entire history and, hey, we have this overwhelming pressure that we need to get to championship weekend to, justify our season? This program is back. They're trending up. They've come a long way in a couple of years under Gary Gate. But at the end of the day, the reality is if they get that stamp like you talk about, it's going to mean getting to championship weekend. And listen, they get through Towson. Towson is a scary opponent. Can they beat Towson? Absolutely. Can they beat Denver or Michigan? Absolutely. Can it go the other way? Yeah. I mean, it's true for a lot of the teams in the tournament not named Notre Dame.
Yeah. And you just said it. You got Notre Dame. Jim Phillips would be thrilled if he had essentially an ACC tournament redo in Philly. That's entirely possible given the lack of the second round matchups that you mentioned there. Notre Dame Duke was the ACC title game. I wouldn't fall out of my chair if that was the national championship game as well. So Anish, look, the ACC is the best conference in college lacrosse. I think we know this, but what you just said about Syracuse are the things that Notre Dame has, that Duke has, that Virginia has. They have transcendent stars. They have experience. They have these things that Syracuse just hasn't been able to gain yet. So when we look at the rest of the ACC here, the Duke game in particular Friday, you and I talked when Syracuse played Duke the first time around. And what you always say about Duke is talent's there, right? Yeah. But are they going to play, right? What Duke team shows up today? Well, this Duke team that's showing up, you said it on the broadcast, they can beat anybody. Notre Dame's always had that, right? Virginia, I know they're not the scary Virginia that we've seen in the past, but you're telling me they can't go off with Lars Tiffany knowing how to navigate these waters as well as anybody, Colin Schnellenberger being one of the best players in the country. It feels like the other ACC teams just have this one element or two that Syracuse just hasn't been able to gain yet that is going to give them the ability to really go deep in this tournament.
Sometimes though history can offer some solace and can offer a little comfort. Virginia's a great example. 2019, that Virginia core, they hadn't won anything. They hadn't won anything in 2019. And they got into the ACC tournament. They had an up and down regular season. They were good, but you still had questions. They had a legitimate goalie question going into the NCAA tournament where they had pulled their goalie late in the season. They had pulled their goalie during the ACC tournament. And then they somehow win the ACC tournament. They get on that run. There was a little fairy dust in that postseason run in 2019, but a team that hadn't won did figure it out along the way, and they end up winning a national championship. And said goalie, Alex Rode, ends up being the MOP of the tournament in 2019. It was wild. Virginia, to me, health is their big concern. You know, they're banged up. Their middies are banged up. They don't really have a great outside shooter. Defensively, their off-ball defense, slide and recovery has just been a disaster. Now, they have the dudes on the defensive side. Jurassic Park is still open for business, but they've looked lost, and they've lost 4 in a row. So, you know, to me, Virginia has one of the scarier first-round games against St. Joe's. Duke, I'm with you, Brent. To me, there's so much talent on this roster. Is Notre Dame the best team? Definitively, yes, they are. I did have Duke as my preseason number 1 just after watching Dyson Williams and Brennan O'Neill in San Diego. But that game Friday was as good as Duke has looked all season. If they bottle up that version for 4 games, and honestly, if they bottle up that version and let's say it's 80%, 75% of that version, they'll play 4 games. They may not win 4 games, but they'll play 4 games. They don't have to play their A game to get to the national championship. That's how good they are. If they play their B-plus game, they'll be playing on Memorial Day. That's how talented that team is. Their issue is there have just been baffling lapses of focus and lack of consistency that I can't explain. Losing to Penn, letting BU hang around and almost losing to BU, losing to North Carolina, a Tar Heels team that was down 3-4 starters, including their leading scorer, Owen Duffy, and their most experienced and their best defender, and Paul Barton, doesn't make sense. And then again, against Notre Dame on Sunday, I thought we were going to get to see, you know, the Duke we saw Friday. And I said that could be maybe a championship game preview. It wasn't there. If Duke and Notre Dame are playing at their best, they are head and shoulders above everybody else in college lacrosse. Notre Dame has shown that they can do that, and they can do that every week. Duke has not shown that they can do that every week. If Duke plays its A game and we get a Duke-Notre Dame final with both playing its A games, it's got a chance to be one of the great spectacles in championship game history in NCAA Division I lacrosse. But I'm with you. The consistency for Duke hasn't been there. Notre Dame has shown it's consistent. I mean, they're 5-0 against the RPI top 5. When you look at who they've beaten, how they've beaten them this season, to me, they remind me a lot of Maryland from 2 years ago.
That's a great comparison. When you look at the bracket, what else kind of hits you in the nose?
You know, I'll say this about Notre Dame now. As the 1 seed, they might have the most dangerous quarterfinal game because they'll get the winner of Georgetown and Penn State. Georgetown beat them. And I think Georgetown figured out the formula. In the moment, we might have said, hey, this seems like a fluky win, right? Sleepy Saturday or Sunday, whatever it was in South Bend, and slow game. I think I fell asleep twice watching that game. It was a boring game. It was a bad game, and Georgetown ends up winning. But they squeezed that game. They controlled the possession advantage. They bled the shot clock, and they got some goals late in the shot clock. Again, it may not be a formula that you can run twice, but they were able to execute it, and they won. And when I talked to Kevin Corrigan this weekend, he said that was a wake-up call for us. Defending champion, target on the back is bigger. You know, you take a weekend off, you're not at your best, the other team will get you because it's their Super Bowl every week, and it got the attention of the team. Penn State, a potential quarterfinal opponent for Notre Dame. Very dangerous. I know they got blasted by Michigan in the Big Ten championship, but this team last year was a whisker away from playing for a national championship. Remember, they lost to Duke on that call that could not be reviewed.
Yeah.
Garrett Ledman was in the crease when he scored the game-winning goal. Now, not to say Duke couldn't have still won that game, but, you know, Penn State's really good. They return a bulk of that team back. TJ Malone's one of the best offensive weapons in the game. Matt Trainor's had a terrific season. They've got a goalie in Jack Frassion, who to me is going to be All-American, second or third team. Probably is one of the 3 or 4 best goalies in the country. He can steal you a game. They have the elements to get back to championship weekend, even if they are an unseeded team. That is not a layup for Notre Dame in a potential quarterfinal game. And again, Georgetown has already beaten Notre Dame in that quarterfinal. So I'm watching that matchup. To me, Maryland's a wounded turtle right now, man. I mean, it's a shell, no pun intended.
I was going to say, you're rolling the puns here pretty good, man.
I know. It is. And Princeton got hot late. Princeton's riding some mojo. Yep. To me, that's a game that has, the ability for the unseeded team to win. Maryland is hurting right now. I've mentioned St. Joe's, Virginia. I'll be doing that game. St. Joe's, man, I mean, they're on one. They got a double-digit win streak. They're riding high. They're big, physical, big Canadian flavor against a UVA team that's lost 4 in a row. That's a game that I'm watching. Denver, Michigan, to me, feels like a toss-up. Michigan's getting hot. Last year, Michigan, got to the quarterfinals. So it's an intriguing first round. I don't expect Notre Dame or Duke as a 1 or 2 seed to have any trouble. Notre Dame's going to get the winner of the play-in game. A 1 seed has never lost in round 1 since the tournament expanded, and Duke gets Utah, who they should be able to handle pretty easily.
I have a wish here before we turn the page, talk about a couple other topics here. I do not want to hear the words Goldmouth associated with deciding a game.
Yeah.
Can we just manifest this, please? I get both sides of the argument here. Syracuse was certainly involved in that earlier this year. Michael Leo against Maryland. We've seen it happen too often in recent years. I don't know if there's a fix there, Anish, but can we have a clean tournament where one team beats another and it has nothing to do with that?
After last year, what just stung me as a fan of the sport, that Duke Penn State national semifinal, it's not even the result, but not being able to review that play.
Yeah.
It was such a bad look for the sport of lacrosse on the biggest stage. Didn't matter who was playing in that game, but when you have a game decided by a goal call that was missed and you have the ability to have replay review, but not for that instance, what are we doing? So as much as I don't want to hear Goldmouth, I just want to see the calls get made correctly. And if we have replay review to change a call in a big moment that could affect the outcome or the continuation or potentially the end of a team season, I'm glad we have that, because it really painted the sport as a whole in such a poor light, where, again, I got to go on and say, we have replay. They can use replay, but this is not a reviewable play. To an average fan, you're going, what kind of sport is this? What are we watching? Yeah. So I'm glad they went out and made that fix. So, yeah, I don't want to hear a Goldmouth either, but more than anything, Brent, I want to see the calls get made correctly.
And at least they can now, because as much as the sport has progressed, I think about when I was playing at Shroff Park back in the late 1980s and what the sport was and how many fans were like, how great this sport is and how it's growing, and how we've consistently heard it's the fastest growing high school sport in the country, one of the fastest growing sports in the country, what the PLL has done to legitimize the sport, all these things. Yet you're in this big spot and they couldn't even review it. It still showed how much the game has to grow and is growing, right?
And it was hard. I remember walking away and I was talking to one of the officials afterwards, and I just said, listen, it's hard because when we broadcast lacrosse, we broadcast it differently than we do football or baseball or basketball. Quint, Clark, myself, Cotter, others who are in it, we are actively invested in seeing this thing get bigger. Obviously, we have a stake in it, but we want to see the sport grow. I always think of myself as a kid who had no exposure to lacrosse, came to Syracuse, watched 4 years of Mike Powell, left as a fan for life. I know how awesome this sport is. And so you're trying to be an ambassador for it. You're trying to push the growth and you're trying to push the positivity. And what was lost in that one replay review was how incredible of a game that was.
Yes.
A Penn State Duke game was incredible. Both semifinal games were incredible, right? Notre Dame, Virginia came down to the wire, went into overtime. Duke, Penn State, again, came right down to the wire. And all anybody remembers is the stupid replay review. And that's what ate at me. I said, we're not going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about the damn review when the game was so good. And if we had just gotten the call right, or if we just had review, everybody's walking away and saying, wow, 2 incredible Final Four games on the biggest stage with a bigger audience. And again, another springboard to get the word out about how great of a sport this is.
And he's changing gears to Syracuse football. We just passed the 5-month mark since Fran Brown was formally introduced as the head coach. The feel of Syracuse football in that short period of time has almost completely changed. Now, I know what the fans are saying. I know what people are saying and feeling kind of here in central New York, right? What I want to know is, now when Syracuse football comes up in conversations in your circles, talking to people at ESPN, just the national figures that you run into, you mentioned you're in Charlotte, so many central New Yorkers and Syracuse alums that have located there, right? When Syracuse football comes up now, what's that conversation like, and how has it changed since even 5 months ago?
Buzz is the word. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at Panthers OTAs, voluntary workouts, and I'm on the field and I was talking to one of our scouts who had been with Fran Brown at Temple. He just comes up to me and he goes, "Hey man, Fran Brown recruiting at your alma mater, huh?" Like, it's out there.
It's got to him. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I said, again, Syracuse is in on players and getting players that, let's be honest, were deleting texts from past Syracuse coaches or assistant coaches. It's stunning. It's mind-boggling. But I think the school has decided something's about to happen in the world of college football. Some sort of, condensing of how many teams are a part of this, and whether you go to 60 teams or whatever it might be, you want to be in that group of 60. You want to be in that group of 60. And it seems they're pushing all their resources to go all in, make football not just viable, but nationally relevant. And here's the real deal about college football, man. Is it coaching and X's and O's and scheme? Yes. But, boy, you get a lot of leash and a lot of leeway if that is not your thing, if you can get great talent. Great talent can mask a lot. Are there questions? Yeah. Can Fran Brown be a head coach? Sure. Of course they are. But in college, the biggest part is assembling talent. And, in a year from now, in 2025, if Syracuse is a 9-win team and they string together a couple of 9-10 win seasons in a row, listen, it changes how people view the program. It's already started to change. I'm on probably half dozen text threads with friends I went to school with, people from Syracuse, and there has been more football chatter on those text threads in the offseason. Every time Fran Brown gets a guy, I get the link to, hey, look at what Brent Axe just tweeted. Fran Brown just got this guy. He just got this guy. You get a lot of Brent Axe tweets now in my group chat. So it's real, man. The buzz is real, and they've put together a roster, and they're, again, in on recruiting. And it's funny, the folks that I've talked to about Fran Brown, the way they speak of him as a recruiter, they like you have no idea. And then the assistant that they got from Texas A&M, the name escapes me.
Elijah Robinson, yeah.
Elijah Robinson. Yeah. He's another one. And I've had people tell me those may be the 2 best recruiters, period, in college football.
Wow.
Period.
And they're at Syracuse, which people are still processing at this point. Something you can appreciate at the heart of this. Now, this is something that's been there before, and it's funny how we're going back to the future here. Fran Brown's first day, he brings up his connections with Paul Pasqualone and George DeLeon. And Anish, those 2 used to just walk into the state of New Jersey and walk out like the Pied Piper with whatever recruits they wanted. They were beloved in that state, and still are, by the way. You had to get back to your Jersey roots. Now, Syracuse started to do that under Dino Babers. I'll give him credit with Nunzio Campanelli, and they were trying to repair those relationships. But at the heart of this, you just brought it up. Fran, Elijah, and so many people, Jersey, Camden, right? So as a Jersey resident, not resident, you live in Carolina, but as a Jersey native, and somebody's got Jersey running through your blood in so many ways, you got to be smiling that this is at the root and the heart of what's turning around Syracuse football.
And I'll share this with you. So a couple of years ago, Paul Pasqualoni was the defensive line coach for the Carolina Panthers. And he and I had it's funny, we got to catch up, and he was let go midseason when Matt Rule and a lot of his guys were let go. But up until that point, we had a lot of chats. We talked a lot about Syracuse football in the old days. And the one thing Paul Pasqualoni told me was, he said, we valued those New Jersey relationships more than anything else, to the point, he said, they would invite these coaches to come up. Hey, watch our practices, come up to camps. The amount of times Coach P and his assistants would go down to New Jersey, not just when they needed something, but again, bring your coaches and your staff up to our camps. We'll show you, sit in on our meetings. He understood that state and the talent that state produced was the lifeblood of the program. And I know the last few years the team slipped, and people wanted Pasqualoni and De Leon out, and maybe the game had passed them by. That's fine. But you can't doubt the talent that Paul Pasqualoni was able to get from the state of New Jersey for a decade plus. And those relationships, those guys loved him. Those guys from New Jersey loved him. And he did tell me, and he said when he got let go, there were a number of coaches who said, I'm not sending my kids up there again. And that's real. And I don't think people still understand, rest in peace, Greg Robinson, but the damage that was done to the football program when Darryl Gross hired a guy who had no idea of what Central New York was, who had no idea how to recruit Syracuse, who thought that Syracuse, a private school in the Northeast, could recruit nationally. It was one of the single worst hires in any sport in the history of that university. And I don't think they have fully recovered. Maybe Fran Brown can change that, but they lost New Jersey. And if you look at who they were recruiting at, Brent, and you and I have had many conversations because we were around for it. They went from recruiting against Penn State and Pittsburgh and BC to recruiting against Cincinnati and Temple and MAC schools by the end of Greg Robinson's era. And, Doug Marrone came in and it got a little bit better, but, they were not in on the guys that they used to be. They were not in on the high-end guys anymore, or even the four-star guys anymore. And, it made it harder for Marrone. It made it harder for Schaefer. It made it harder for Dino Babers. So identifying a guy who could bring back New Jersey, I thought that was pretty good recognition by John Wildhack, knowing that what do we need? We need a guy who can go get talent. And they went and got Fran Brown, and they got Elijah Robinson. But the damage that Greg Robinson did, and then I put more of the blame on Darryl Gross, the damage that they did in those 4 years, this football program, all the wounds still haven't healed.
Yeah, and it's a lesson about be careful what you wish for when fans call for coaching changes. By the way, I was one of those people. Adam shined before me. And like you said, the program had kind of come to its end. But you do have to be careful what you wish for when you call for a coaching change. What's the plan? What are you going to do to enhance this? You don't just snap a finger, make this change, and all is well. You said it as well as could be about how long it has taken for this thing to fix itself. Maybe Fran Brown's there, and we're starting to see receipts in on players they normally wouldn't be on, recruiting, repairing those relationships, all those things. But, man, to think that that's 20 years ago.
20 years.
And how quickly that can go by. It shows
and you got to realize
the weight of these decisions.
It's about who you are, too, where there is no local geographical footprint, right? I mean, you get a Mike Hart every now and then, but he went to Michigan. Latavius Murray went to UCF, right? Greg Paulus decided to play basketball at Duke and then 1 year at Syracuse. So not that area doesn't produce players. It does, but not enough to sustain a program the way LSU can or Georgia can or Clemson can. So it's different. And I think it was felt more at a place like Syracuse. Maybe other programs could have recovered faster, but when you don't have that geographial footprint, and when, again, your big recruiting base is New Jersey, which you have seeded, where are you going to go get players from? And it became a challenge. And again, they've been largely irrelevant since Paul Pasqualoni was let go. They've been largely irrelevant. They had a couple blips here and there, right? Fran Brown, again, they haven't played a game yet. but at least in this offseason, has made this program more nationally relevant in one offseason than maybe the sum total of the last 20 years combined.
Anish, one last thing for you here on a different note. You brought up your association with the Carolina Panthers a couple times there. Here's where I'm going to marry your beloved New York Yankees and the Carolina Panthers, okay? You grew up in Jersey. You have said many times that John Sterling, the voice of the Yankees, who has recently stepped down from that title, told you more bedtime stories than your parents did, right? You were the stereotypical kid, listening on your transistor radio when you're supposed to be going to bed, right? And you are a Yankees fan of the core. And you recently got to broadcast at Yankee Stadium, a Yankees game, which just had to be something that will forever top the list of events you'll be able to do. But here's what I want to ask you about and why I bring it up. You know how special it is when a play-by-play broadcaster can connect with a team. So now that you are the voice of the Carolina Panthers, what does that mean in 2024? How have you found that connection with the Carolina Panthers fan base so far?
It's been interesting. Obviously, on field, the team hasn't had a lot of success. And I think a big part of that connection when the team wins and it's your voice serving as the soundtrack, that helps. But the fans have been so welcoming to me, and I've appreciated that from the moment I got the job and to the messages that they sent. It's funny. As a guy who grew up in the Northeast, this is home for me, man. I'm not leaving Charlotte. This is my home. I want to be the voice of the Panthers for a long time and hopefully can call multiple Super Bowl wins. It's been special. It's really been special. You go around town. The other day we were out in the city, and a fan just kind of stopped me and said, "Hey, Bryce Young year 2." And I said, "Yep." I said, things are looking up, and hopefully we can take that step forward. And it's cool. It's different. It helped that being in the ACC footprint for so many years, there was some familiarity where a lot of fans of NC State and Duke and Carolina, they're Panther fans on Sunday, and I throw Clemson and Virginia Tech in there as well. So people were familiar. Lacrosse games, there's crossover. So the neat thing is I've lived in this city a long time. I've lived in Charlotte now almost 13 years. And you have a lot of these relationships, and there's a lot of these people that already. And it's really just more than anything helped me further my roots in this community, in this area. I would say more than anything, man, it's the fans who've made me feel at home, and they've made me feel welcome. And I can't even begin to say how much that means to me. It means to my family, just the conversations that I have, with some of them at training camp or walking to the parking lot after a game. It's neat, man. It's neat. And I'm still growing into it in terms of, what I'm doing on my end. And I'm hopeful that I can call some more wins and this thing gets turned around soon. And I think that'll make it even more fun. But, these first couple of years, wins and losses aside, man, it's been special. It's been unique. It's different to what I was doing before. But I've loved every minute of it.
That's great to hear, and continued luck and success to you in that road, my friend. And I to close here, I brought this up in the open. Anish was a part of what is still one of the most surreal things I've ever experienced in my life. When we watched the finale of The Sopranos.
Oh my gosh.
I think about that every time I see a Sopranos clip, that we're watching that, the screen goes black, and then my neighborhood went black, instantly. Like at the same time.
Yeah, I'm backing you. I'll back you up on that. Like people.
Yeah, nobody ever believes me when I tell that story with you as my witness.
We thought the power went out. Like what just happened?
Yes.
Sitting there drinking Chianti and eating cannolis. Remember that?
That's right. A little Italian feast. I loved it. My friend, always great to catch up. Continued luck and success to you. I know we'll do it again down the road, but thanks for hanging with us today here on Syracuse Sports.
Always a pleasure, my friend.